Hey everybody, I'm back. I'm trying to use a microphone this time, so if you've got to be shitting me. Okay. Oh my god. Um, I'm trying to use a microphone. If it just sounds like phone audio, then assume that this is a failed experiment. But I am here today to talk about Amber Heard, which I've wanted to talk about on here, but it's an emotionally difficult topic and also just so overwhelming in terms of the amount of information that exists about it and also the amount of misinformation that exists about it. I viscerally remember what it was like to watch the trial unfold, and watching a woman's sexual assault testimony be mocked to the point of becoming like a TikTok trend. I'll never be able to forget that. That's not something I can forget. It set a terrifying precedent that has only further been proven as man after man has just copied the Johnny Depp Darvo playbook and just Darvos all the way down. Darvo is a strategy beloved by abusers the world over. The letters stand for deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. If you react to abuse enacted upon you, they will deny wrongdoing, attack to your perceived faults, and then convince you that you're the real abuser. And when applied on such a large scale, this strategy can apparently convince the entire world of the same thing. My cat is being a problem right now. I am so sorry about that. Yeah, I've been hemming and hawing about making this video for a couple reasons. Firstly, history school is time consuming as fuck. So many, I feel like my whole life is full of PDFs, which honestly, we're gonna be looking at a fucking PDF for most of this video, so apparently I just inflict that upon myself in my spare time as well, so that's really great. But, I it's emotionally exhausting, and thirdly, Twitter decided to place me in the algorithmic hell of Johnny Depp fan communities. And at first, it's funny when, like, the insane claims these people make about Amber Heard are so, like, easily on their face ridiculous and disproven. It's like you see it and how could any of these idiots believe this and how could anyone take them seriously? And their hatred for her, at least the kind that isn't just like obvious drooling devotion to a washed up actor, comes from such an obvious place of misogyny, mostly internalized, given that the defenders seem to be mostly women for whatever reason. But that is kind of the problem. There's a reason that it is so obvious. It's because they delight in it. They don't care. They know. And I'm not gonna repeat the type of shit that I see them say about her, but their bigotry is always so apparent. Bigotry, which, by the way, frequently extends to things beyond Amber Heard. Do not ask a Johnny Depp fangirl how they feel about J.K. Rowling. Girl, don't do it. Constant slurs, degrading language, slut shaming, biphobia, which, like, the thing is, I don't even, the hilarious part is that I'm bisexual, right? I identify as bisexual, but usually, when people complain about biphobia, it's like not a real actual thing that they're complaining about. But then you see the way that people talk about Amber Heard, and it's like, wow, oh my god, biphobia is real. Well, I didn't know that. Thank you for, wow, interesting. Um, Okay, we got to get back on track. I at one point I started beefing with them on Twitter, just like kind of for a laugh, and these freaks like transvestigated me and were utterly convinced that I was born a man, which was honestly a really gender affirming experience for me because I think that T-girl swag is the coolest thing in the world. So to know that apparently in the eyes of Johnny Depp people, I have that, I'm like, fuck yeah, that's exactly what I'm going for. Thank you. Is it the eyebrows? I don't. Okay, I'm not gonna high center on that too much. So, like, it was kind of a gender affirming experience for me. I got something good out of it in the end, but I mean it when I say that they are so quick to show their colors. Like, these are bigots. These are right wing bigots. Even if they act like they're like representing male abuse victims or whatever, like it's bigotry. It's bigotry that they are showcasing. Um, for a little context here, I guess I should say that like the first favorite actor I ever had was Johnny Depp when I was a teenager. If you asked me what my favorite actor was, that's what I would say because I didn't really know that many actors, and I loved the movie Benny and June. Actually, hold on. I have this thrift store DVD of it still. This is when did this movie come out? 1993. So it's like little baby Johnny Depp. But I haven't rewatched this in a long ass time. Honestly, I don't know how much I would like it now, but when I was a teenager, I loved this, and I was also really into Tim Burton, so I just kind of by default liked Johnny Depp. But then I kind of grew out of being a teenager, and by extension, grew out of any form of really celebrity worship, although Johnny Depp was never like a celebrity that I had like on a pedestal, like, oh, this is the greatest man that has ever existed. He could never possibly do anything wrong, which is how most of these like fans seem to perceive him and treat him. And it's just, I don't know. It's really, it's weird. I don't like it. So when like Amber Heard first told her story, first started telling her story, I just kind of believed her on its face because the story she told made a lot of sense, you know? A washed up actor who met her when she was, I think she was 23, he was 46. That's, there's some questions that could be brought up there immediately. Also, his persistent habit of dating women in their 20s. This is another thing we could talk about. And also the fact that he has like a known drug and alcohol problem and a known history of being violent. So like when she was like, "Oh, he abused me," I was like, "Yeah, that makes sense. Cool." And Johnny Depp's story doesn't make sense. Like the convoluted story that he tries to weave here. Many, when confronted with the reality of Johnny Depp's abusive nature, will point to the outcome of the Fairfax, Virginia trial as proof of what like a lying, conniving whore that Amber Turd is. Like their words, not mine. This is the mild end of the kind of things these people say about her. I think a great way to dismantle the fact that this trial proves anything is looking at Amber Heard's sorry, looking at Amber Heard's appeal, which was made public in 2022. And this thing is a beast, tearing through the shitty china shop of Johnny Depp's case. And the dispute was settled between the parties so that Johnny wouldn't keep suing Amber into oblivion forever, which honestly, like, he might still do that given how, like, it was an effective strategy. Obviously it worked, given the fact that when I like referenced Amber Heard as an abuse victim, I had people in my comments like being like, wasn't she the abuser? No, no, she wasn't. And this trial was fucking bogus. Someone and looking with a brain at this, and you ask, how did he win this case? And I mean, the answer's kind of there, but it's not a good one. You won't like it. And before we go any further here, I want to give the biggest shout out of all time to Medjugorje and her series on this case. If you haven't watched it, you need to. It is a wildly comprehensive breakdown of everything that is so clear. It just lays it all out. Kind of one of the other reasons that I've been putting off making this video is I'm like questioning how much I even need to make this, because I feel like she's truly pretty much said everything that needs to be said about this case. But like also, if you watch her whole series, I think it's like 9 hours of content in total, which I understand if people maybe don't want to do, so I'm hoping this can be kind of like a more condensed overview type thing that we're doing here. Although, like, again, watch the Medjugorje series, please. I'm begging you to watch this. I mean, I don't know, man, just put it on 1.25 speed. I've watched it and rewatched it on 1.25 speed, and it's comprehensible, so you can speed it up a little bit that way. Anyway, enough of the Medjugorje dick riding. Again, please, oh my god, please watch her series. I guess we have to start looking at this fucking appeal brief now. Okay. Also, I want to say, I got this document from a link on Medjugorje's, I think it's an archive page on her website, but there's an archive link to it in the description of her videos. So that's what we're going to be looking at here today. This is an appeal that Amber Heard's appellate lawyers that she hired after the case submitted. Opening up here, statement of the case. In 2016, appellant Amber Heard obtained a domestic violence temporary restraining order over her then husband, appellee, John C. Depp II. 2 years later, Heard authored an opinion piece that ultimately published by the Washington Post, in which she discussed the public backlash she experienced after that legal proceeding and advocated for policy changes to support women who report gender-based violence. Heard took great care not to mention Depp or to repeat her prior allegations of abuse by him. But Depp sued Heard for defamation, and that is something that we need. Like, this is a defamation trial that he turned in the public eye into a trial of Amber Heard's character, which is just ridiculous. And the reason that he had to do it that way is because he has no actual evidence of defamation. Like, he did not sufficiently or at all prove actual malice, which is a necessary, it talks about this, we're gonna get into it. Okay. Depp sued Heard for defamation. Sorry, there's fucking cat hair in my mouth because she's right here. Claiming that she had revived her 2016 allegations by merely describing the reaction to them. This is already ridiculous. It's already ridiculous. This case should never have gone to trial because another court had already concluded that Depp abused Heard on multiple occasions. After Depp filed this case, the United Kingdom High Court of Justice ruled in a separate defamation action brought by Depp that Heard's abuse allegations were true. The trial court should not have given preclusive effect to that 129-page decision, which followed a 3-week trial at which Depp and Heard and 24 other witnesses testified. Once this case did go to trial, Depp failed as a matter of law to meet his burden to prove actual malice by clear and convincing evidence in 2 ways. First, he did not demonstrate that Heard was aware of and intended to communicate the alleged defamatory implication that he had abused her. Second, he did not establish that Heard knew the alleged implication was false or subjectively entertained serious doubts about its truth. The trial court erred in declining to set aside the jury verdict and enter the judgment in Heard's favor. The trial court then refused Heard's proposed jury instruction on the communicative intent prong of actual malice. Consequently, the jury instructions were missing a key requirement for establishing this defamation by implication claim. In addition, the resulting jury verdict against Heard on all of Depp's claims cannot be reconciled with the jury verdict against Depp on Heard's counterclaim. To find in favor of Depp, the jury must have concluded that Depp did not abuse Heard and that Heard knowingly lied in accusing him of abuse. But to find in favor of Heard, the jury must have concluded that Heard told the truth about being a victim of domestic abuse by Depp. Accordingly, the verdict against Heard cannot stand. Finally, even if this court were to disagree with all of the foregoing, the jury's award to Depp of $10 million in compensatory damages and $5 million in punitive damages, statutorily reduced to $350,000, clearly is excessive given the narrow time frame for which Depp could recover. Okay. On to another part of the document. I think this is a few pages down. The trial. The case proceeded to a 6-week trial, and notwithstanding that Depp focused on attacking Heard's credibility and portraying her as a liar, the court precluded Heard from introducing documents and other evidence corroborating her accusations, and allowed Depp to admit irrelevant and unduly prejudicial evidence that he further used to attack Heard's character. And this is the continuing strategy of his fans and the people that defend him, is to bring in this utterly irrelevant evidence and then completely ignore all of the incredibly relevant evidence that does exist against Johnny Depp. He presented a playbook to abusers and abuse apologists the world over that they keep using. They're just going to keep using it as long as it keeps working, I guess. We have Diddy on trial accusing Cassie of, mutual abuse, which is a concept that only exists in a trial like this because Johnny Depp presented it to the world in a context where it was so fucking successful. The world still hates Amber Heard. I feel like the tide might be kind of turning, I have been seeing a general trend of, but I don't know. It's so hard to tell on social media if things are actually widespread or if it's just, the little algorithmic circle that you're in, because as much as I see Johnny Depp apologists on Twitter these days, I see Amber Heard defenders as much, if not maybe a little bit more. I don't know. That I really gotta get off that site. I really do. Not good. Not good. Let's get back to these papers. Okay, I figured out where we are. We need to talk about the significance of the trial taking place in Virginia, because pretty objectively it should have taken place in California, and the reason it didn't is because if it had taken place in California, the anti-SLAPP laws that they have there, which is strategic lawsuits against public participation, it's basically laws designed to prevent this exact kind of abuse by defamation trial, and it would not have even gone to trial in California, which is why they had to construct this weird house of cards to have it take place in Virginia. So in the documents here it says, Depp's defamation claims arose outside of Virginia. The trial court ruled that Depp's defamation claims arose in Virginia solely because the Washington Post uploaded the op-ed to the internet via computer servers located in Springfield, Virginia. That ruling is inconsistent with Virginia law as applied to internet publications, which dictates that Depp's claims arose in California. Virginia adheres to the rule of lex loci delicti, I don't know, or the place of the wrong, to determine where a tort cause of action arises. Virginia was, that state was California, and the trial court abused discretion in holding that the claims arose in Virginia. So it is supposed to take place where the majority of the damages take place, and also it kind of makes sense where both of the participants live, and all of that. California, 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 California. But Virginia, they put it on TV, and they didn't have the anti-SLAPP laws, and that is the whole reason that it even went to trial in the first place. Virginia was a completely inconvenient forum. Because the trial erroneously concluded that Depp's claims arose in Virginia and Heard therefore had not met the prerequisite to dismiss the case based on forum non-convenience, it did not consider whether there was good cause to dismiss the action. Good cause includes but is not limited to the avoidance of substantial inconvenience to the parties of the witnesses. Had the court analyzed good cause, it necessarily would have concluded that Virginia was a completely inconvenient forum for this cause. None of the conduct relevant to Depp's defamation claims occurred in Virginia. Depp is a resident of California. Found my spot again. Depp is a resident of California. The incidents that led Heard to obtaining the restraining order took place in California, not Virginia. Heard wrote the op-ed in California and then sent it to the ACLU in New York. The ACLU provided the op-ed to the Washington Post, which published it online. Heard had no contact with any Washington Post employee. To the best of our knowledge, Heard had never set foot in Virginia prior to this lawsuit. In short, the Washington Post computer server's presence in Springfield is the only connection between these claims in Virginia, which means that Depp's choice of forum is entitled to little weight. In contrast, both parties and most of the fact witnesses were located in California, and none of them were located in Virginia. Because of this error, Heard suffered substantial prejudice in two ways. First, and most significantly, Heard was unable to subpoena any witnesses for the 6-week trial and forced to rely almost exclusively on deposition designations to defend herself. Okay. Sorry, there's so many parentheses here. References to other cases and whatnot. This is like legal documents. Woo! The lack of compulsory process meant first that the only live witnesses Heard were able to call in her defense was her own sister. Depp, who had considerable resources from his decades as a movie star, was able to call more than 15 live fact witnesses who voluntarily traveled to Virginia from other jurisdictions or appeared by WebEx, many of whom are employed by or otherwise financially linked to Depp. Depp capitalized on this disparity, arguing to the jury, "You may have noticed that no one showed up for Miss Heard in this courtroom other than her sister, other than a witness who traveled to Virginia as her paid expert. This is a woman who burns bridges. Her close friends don't show up for her." So it is like, how do you reconcile that? You know, how do you look at the inclusion of this in a trial, of them having it take place in Virginia so that she could not have any witnesses, and then telling the jury, "See how she has no witnesses? Look how evil, and everyone hates her." Like, it's just, to me, it's frustrating to even talk about this because it's like so obvious what actually happened and that it was abuse. So the fact that people could look at this case and think anything else is just like, it's so frustrating and kind of mind-blowing to me. Secondly, the lack of compulsory process prevented Heard from responding as Depp shifted his case. While Depp was able to redirect witnesses and call new, previously undisclosed witnesses in rebuttal, Heard was reliant on video deposition testimony. Again, how do you reconcile that? Okay, moving on. The trial court should have dismissed Depp's claims because the challenge statements are non-actionable expressions of opinion. Expressions of opinion are constitutionally protected and are not actionable as defamation. Statements that lack a provably false factual connotation or are relative in nature and largely depend upon the speaker's viewpoint are expressions of opinion. The three challenge statements, so these are the three statements in the article that Johnny Depp challenged. With the exception of the portion of the headline stating, "I spoke up against sexual violence," which is obviously true, are protected opinion. There is no objective basis for assessing the truth or falsity of whether Heard felt or faced our culture's wrath, or whether she is a public figure representing domestic abuse, or whether she saw institutions protect men. These statements are relative in nature and reflect Heard's subjective viewpoints. The article very explicitly took so much care to not mention him at all. She had her lawyers come in and revise the draft that the ACLU sent her because she did not want him mentioned at all, because she did not want this happening, because she did not want this publicized. He wanted this publicized, and then acted like she was like trying to ruin his life intentionally because she hated him that much, when he is the one who brought this to the public. It was all him. He started the first trial. He started the second trial. He broke the NDA first in the fucking GQ article. Like, everything that he is blaming her for, he did. It's literally, you know that meme of the person, like, falling off the bike and being like, how could, like, that's literally Johnny Depp falling off the bike and being like, how could I ever do this, man? It is undisputed that the op-ed does not mention Depp's name or the party's prior relationship, describe the 2016 restraining order, or discuss Heard's statements of evidence in that proceeding, which is all stuff that he would later bring into the trial, things that were not part of the statements that he was suing her for defamation over. Like, his entire goal was to turn this into something that it was not once it was facing the public, and to get everyone to hate her and win via widespread misogyny. Like, that was his whole, and it worked. That's the depressing thing, is that it worked. Notwithstanding the absence of any express reference to the allegations underlying the 2016 proceeding, Depp's position is that the op-ed implies he abused her because reasonable readers would understand the words, "2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse," to refer to that proceeding. Depp contends, in other words, that Heard revived her 2016 allegations simply by describing in the op-ed the public backlash she faced after obtaining the restraining order. All of these are things that objectively happened and that she was well within her right to describe in this article. Depp's theory of liability extends the meaning of words used beyond recognition. Similarly, in the op-ed, Heard did not recount the events underlying the domestic violence proceeding. Rather, she discussed how women who allege domestic violence are treated by society, and she advocated for changes to the relevant laws and social norms. To accept, as the trial court did, that Depp's assertion that a reasonable reader could understand the op-ed to imply that he abused her merely by describing the public reaction to her allegations would be to create a rule preventing any abused person from addressing the societal implications of speaking out about the abuse. If that were the law, it would then be actionable in defamation to say 4 years ago. I guess this was made public in, I'm not sure, it would be more than 4 years ago at this point. Anyway, Christine Blasey Ford became a public figure representing sexual assault. That is plainly not the law, and that is the precedent that was intended to be set with this case, and the precedent that kind of, to a degree, like, has been set. And the fact that people could look at that and not see an issue with just the entire foundation of this trial on its face is like, it doesn't make me feel good about the world. It doesn't make me feel good about the world. It does not. Anyway. The trial court's ruling also contravenes the doctrine of judicial privilege. The statements Heard made in the course of obtaining the restraining order were absolutely privileged. Permitting a claim for defamation by implication premised on a person's published statement about how her experiences in the aftermath of a judicial proceeding would substantially undercut the public policy served by judicial privilege. Like, again, the implications of the precedent that this sets are not good. The beast that you are feeding will come for you too. It's not good. It's not good. It's not good. It also, this talks about, in overruling her demurrer on this issue, the trial court relied primarily on this case of a defamation action brought by a mother of a student at school who died from a peanut allergy, and she alleged school statements kind of blamed her in statements made to the public when a school official said, "Trained professionals can only be effective if a parent provides information, doctor-prescribed health plans, and the medicines necessary to carry out those plans. Unfortunately, this does not always occur." The Supreme Court, held that these statements were reasonably capable, oh my god, what is happening, of conveying the defamatory implication the mother alleged. Unlike here, the statements at issue in this case were a direct response to questions about the child's death. Thus, the words used by the defendant readily implied a casual relationship between the child's death and the mother's accusations. In stark contrast, the op-ed does not refer to Depp or anything at all about her abuse accusations or the judicial proceedings in which she obtained the restraining order. She is just talking about the public reaction to what happened, and that is what she is being sued for. Do you like that? I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Okay, now we have to talk about the UK ruling and how that was not really allowed to be, I mean, it was allowed to be referenced in the trial, and we're going to talk about the problematic ways in which it was. But here it says, the trial court should have dismissed Depp's claims because the doctrine of issue preclusion prevents relitigation of the UK court's ruling that Heard's abuse allegations are substantially true. Issue preclusion bars successive litigation of an issue of fact or law actually litigated and resolved in a valid court determination essential to prior judgment, even if the issue recurs in the context of a different claim. It is there to relieve the parties of the cost and vexation of multiple lawsuits, conserve judicial resources. Like, this was truly wasting judicial resources. That is what this trial was doing to an absurd degree, in addition with, like, ruining the world. Oh, we're all gonna die. Anyway, and preventing inconsistent decisions, encouraging reliance on adjudication. Like, I think with probably a lot of other people, really lost faith in the legal system throughout the course of this case. That was like, not that I really had any faith in it to begin with. We reference the anarchy flag again. I don't think we do, but like, this was truly the nail in the coffin for me. I was like, oh, we're, Fiona Apple, there's no hope for women. That's very much where I was and kind of where I remain after the outcome of this case, and until I see like public vindication for Amber Heard, I think I'm always gonna feel that way. Anyway, back to these papers. To establish issue preclusion, a party must show that the relevant factual issue was actually litigated in the prior proceeding. And it was. It was. There is no dispute that the truth of Heard's abuse allegations was actually elicited and essential to the prior judgment in the UK proceeding. In the Sun published an article calling Depp a white beater, and Depp sued the Sun, alleging that it defamed him because the abuse allegations were false. In rejecting Depp's claim, the UK court found, based on much of the same evidence presented in this case, e.g. Depp and Heard's testimony, that Depp had engaged in at least 12 acts of domestic violence against Heard, causing her to fear for her life. The UK court therefore concluded that the defendants had proved the Sun's description of Depp as a wife beater was substantially true. There is no question that Depp had full and fair opportunity to litigate this issue. Depp chose to file a libel suit in the UK predicated on the same abuse allegations that he contends were revived by Heard's op-ed. Indeed, Depp's UK counsel asserted prior to trial that his client would only be vindicated by a clear and reasoned judgment from the UK court. The parties to the UK proceeding engaged in extensive discovery and motions practice, and Depp also had access to the discovery conducted for this case for 16 months prior to the UK trial. The UK trial included 4 days of each testimony by Depp and Heard, as well as 24 other witnesses, and under UK law, Depp faced a much lighter burden of proof on his claims than he did in Virginia. In the UK, the defendants bore the burden of proving the substantial truth of the statements, rather than Depp having the burden of proving them false. Yet Depp still lost and then exhausted his appeals. In short, he had his day in court in the UK proceedings, and this Virginia lawsuit should have stopped. It should have been precluded from relitigating the same factual issue and decided against him in that action. And according to this, appeal, accordingly, this court should reverse and dismiss Depp's claims, which I agree with. That would be a really great world if that was the world we lived in. I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, but the reason that he had to make this facing the public something that was not the defamation trial that it started out as was because he had no basis for this trial. Again, it would not have even gone to trial in California. In sum, Depp presented no evidence, much less clear and convincing evidence, that Heard either intended to communicate through the op-ed that Depp had abused her or knew of the defamatory meaning and was reckless in regard to it. Like, that's not something that you can just say and then tell them to disprove. Like, you need to provide proof of knowing defamation when you are bringing something, which he didn't have because it doesn't exist. So obviously it had to be turned into something else, because if it had been based on his evidence, it would have fallen through so fast. Even if this court concludes that the record contained clear and convincing evidence that Heard knew at the time of publication that the op-ed communicated to the readers the implication that she was asserting that Depp had abused her, the record contains no evidence that she knew or thought it likely that such a statement was false. Depp failed to carry his burden on actual malice for this separate reason. In this regard, it bears emphasis there is significant difference between proof of actual malice and mere proof of falsity. That is what he was focusing on. He had no proof of actual malice because that proof did not exist. There is no such evidence. Depp alleged that the op-ed falsely implied that Heard was a victim of domestic abuse by him. Because the actual malice is a subjective standard, whether Heard believed Depp had abused her must be judged by her own state of mind. Heard testified unequivocally that she believed that Depp had abused her physically, verbally, emotionally, and psychologically. Depp and his expert witnesses conceded that abuse can take many forms, including verbal, emotional, and psychological, and the trial record contains considerable undisputed evidence supporting that proposition that Heard, at the time of the publication, believed that Depp had abused her. For example, Depp demanded that Heard cut him with a knife and threatened to cut himself in her presence when she refused to comply. There is an audio recording of this. I've heard it. You can hear it if you want. It's pretty fucking disturbing. Depp engaged in violent behavior in Heard's vicinity on multiple occasions, including kicking cabinets and doors, smashing glasses, punching a light fixture, and toppling racks of clothing in her closet and throwing one rack down a staircase. There's video and photo evidence for all of this. Depp exhibited jealous and controlling behavior toward Heard, such as accusing her of infidelity and promiscuity, including messages written around the house in his own blood, and forbidding her from acting in movies or having meetings. Depp admitted to headbutting Heard, although he claimed it was unintentional. The record also contains many other examples of disputed evidence of abuse, but the court need not even consider those to appropriately conclude that the trial should have struck the jury verdict of Depp's failure to prove actual malice. Depp told Heard on one occasion, "I left last night, honestly I swear to you, because I just couldn't take the idea of more physicality and more physical abuse on each other." Importantly, even if the jury could properly have concluded that these undisputed facts did not constitute abuse, and a reasonable jury could not have done so, this was a very unreasonable jury, Depp presented no evidence that undercut Heard's testimony that she believed this conduct amounted to abuse. Consequently, Depp failed to meet this burden on the second prong of actual malice, and the court should enter judgment in Heard's favor for this independent reason. Okay, now we need to talk about the evidence that Amber was and wasn't, and the evidence that Johnny was and wasn't allowed to take to the trial. In this appeal, it says the trial court made numerous evidentiary errors that severely prejudiced Heard at trial. This court reviewed a trial court's admission or exclusion of evidence for abuse of discretion. The trial's numerous errors evidentiary rulings prevented the jury from receiving evidence highly probative of the truth of the implication that Depp alleged. Hold on, this sentence is not making sense to me. Okay, I read it again. I'm just gonna paraphrase. They prevented her from including evidence that proved the truth of her claims, including, like, medical professionals, that kind of thing, and allowed Depp to use irrelevant and unduly prejudicial evidence to attack her on purely collateral matters. Each of these evidentiary errors standing alone would warrant a new trial and cumulatively clearly mandate reversal. The trial court erred by excluding evidence of Depp's abuse and Heard's state of mind. Long before she sought the restraining order, she made numerous statements to third parties about his abusive conduct. Instead of permitting the jury to consider this critical evidence, the court excluded it based on erroneous application of Virginia hearsay law. Statements about Depp's abuse made years prior to any potential litigation were essential to the jury's consideration of the facts and Heard's credibility, especially given that Depp made Heard's credibility the linchpin of the case. Like, I hope you're starting to see how this worked and how this was just an extension of his abuse in the public eye. He said, there's a text message where he said that his goal was total global humiliation for Amber Heard. That's his words. That's his words. Heard's reports of abuse to medical providers plainly were admissible. The trial court excluded this evidence as hearsay, which Depp both used as a shield and a sword. Not only did he convince the court to preclude Heard from presenting relevant admissible evidence to corroborate her claims, but he then weaponized that exclusion, arguing to the jury that such evidence did not exist, exactly like he did with her lack of witnesses. If you remember a little bit before, he was like, oh, look, no one showed up for Amber, and now it's like Miss Heard has told you that she has mountains of evidence of abuse, but there are no medical records reflecting she sustained any injuries from this abuse she claims. That statement is unequivocally false. There are medical records, she just was not allowed to admit them. The trial court had wrongly excluded those very mountains of medical records created from 2011 to 2016. There's like a long period. Virginia's hearsay rule precludes the introduction of an out-of-court statement offered to prove the truth of a matter asserted only if the statement does not fall within one of the recognized exceptions to the rule. One exception is for statements made for purposes purposes of medical diagnosis or treatment, which all of these statements fucking were, and therefore they should have been admitted, and the fact that they were not means that the trial basically just falls apart. I hope we're understanding that. I hope we're understanding that. Okay. Here's the evidence that was excluded. From 2011 to 2014, Heard was treated by clinical psychologist Bonnie Jacobs. Dr. Jacobs' contemporaneous medical records show Heard repeatedly reported Depp's abuse. In August 2012, she reported he was in a rage, accused her of cheating, and threw a glass at her head. In September, she reported Depp was violent and ripped her nightgown, threw her on a bed, tried to have sex but couldn't get erection, became more angry. On November 15th, Heard reported sometimes he became verbally and sexually abusive after spending time with father, and that's Heard's father in this case, which that's a whole other like disturbing aspect of this case when you look at like her background and her history. Like, this whole thing is just, it's so disturbing. From 2014 to 2016, Heard was treated by psychologist Connell Cowan. Dr. Cowan's records reflect that in December 2015, Heard reported that Depp was physically abusive and that he started the physicality and pushed her down. From 2014 to 2016, she sought medical treatment from nurse Erin Falati, I don't know, for injuries caused by Depp. Her notes reflect that. In December 2015, she reported that he headbutted her. In May 2016, she reported that he hit her in the face. In 2015 and 2016, Heard and Depp saw Laurel Anderson, a clinical psychologist who was treating them. During therapy sessions, Heard reported that Depp slapped her, hit her in the head, pulled her hair, and kicked her in the leg, causing her bruises. In 2015 and 2016, Amy Banks, a clinical psychologist, treated Heard and Depp. In a joint session, Heard discussed Depp's violence, which he did not contradict. These statements were made long before she would have had any motive to fabricate allegations of abuse, and each should have been admitted as the statements made for the purpose of obtaining medical treatment for both emotional distress and physical injuries, as well as statements showing her state of mind. Moreover, each of these statements about Depp's abuse, whether made to medical professionals, friends, or family, also should have been omitted for the independent reason that they are prior consistent statements. Once Depp attacked Heard's credibility and accused her of fabricating her allegations of abuse, the trial court should have permitted her to introduce these prior consistent statements. Like, you when you watch footage of the trial and you see fucking Camille Vasquez, I'm gonna hold my tongue. I'm gonna hold my tongue lest I be accused of the misogyny that I am attacking, because I have some things to say about her that could definitely be construed as misogynistic. So like her, standing up there saying, if you have evidence of this abuse, where is it, when she knows damn well that all of it was excluded because it was supposedly hearsay? Like, it's just so fucking terminally sick. Like, oh my god. Oh my god. He wrongfully excluded corroborating testimony of her allegations, like the text exchange with Depp's agent in which he says, like, when I told you he kicked you, he cried. Like, that wasn't allowed to be shown in court because that's hearsay, apparently, despite the fact that it was his goddamn employee, and it improperly excluded the UK judgment. Prior to trial, Heard opposed Depp's motion in limit to exclude the UK judgment, and during the trial, Heard sought to admit the judgment after Depp opened the door to the evidence on numerous occasions. Saying things like, I had to wait for my opportunity to address the charges, and so today is my first opportunity that I've been able to speak about this case in full for the first time. Man. Do you like my Johnny Depp impression? Is it good? I feel like it's really good. When the trial court allowed references to the UK proceeding, it precluded the jury from learning about the outcome. Admitting the UK judgment would not have been unfairly prejudicial to Depp, but its exclusion unfairly prejudiced Heard in at least two ways. Firstly, the court's decision to allow Depp to refer to the UK proceedings without explaining the outcome left the jury with the mistaken impression that the outcome of the trial was favorable to Depp, when in fact, the UK court found that Depp had abused Heard on at least 12 occasions. Depp promoted this misperception throughout the trial. While testifying, the court permitted Depp to read into the record the title of an article, Johnny Depp was the victim of abuser Amber Heard, London's High Court told. Similarly, Depp's damages expert testified that Depp brought the UK proceeding to clear his name, which served to mislead the jury about the outcome of the proceedings. Secondly, as more fully described in section 3.5 below, the Sun article that precipitated the UK proceeding Depp's decision to file the UK lawsuit, the trial and significant media attention, and the UK judgment finding that Depp had in fact abused Heard undoubtedly negatively impacted Depp's reputation. Nonetheless, Heard was precluded from presenting the jury with this highly relevant evidence regarding damages. So his whole goal here was to attempt to say that the entirety of his reputational damage rested on her shoulders because of the 3 lines she wrote about being a public figure representing abuse in an op-ed. And she was not allowed to bring any evidence about the fact that his reputation was well and truly in the toilet prior to this, due solely to his own doing. The trial court erred by excluding evidence of the UK judgment. Depp alleged that Heard defamed him by falsely writing in the op-ed, "I became a public figure representing domestic abuse." On cross-examination, Heard's counsel sought to ask Depp whether the specific statement was accurate. Despite the fact that Depp was required to prove the falsity of this statement as an essential element of his claim, the trial court precluded him from answering this question on the ground that it called for a legal conclusion. This was an abuse of discretion. Now we're going to go more into the evidence that he was allowed to admit in court. In at least 2 instances, the trial court admitted irrelevant and unduly prejudicial evidence that had nothing to do with the case but allowed Depp to attack Heard's character. And again, she was not allowed to bring forward any evidence to dispute this. The trial court committed reversible error when it admitted irrelevant and unfairly prejudicial evidence related to a purely collateral issue, Heard's pledge to donate the proceeds of her divorce settlement to charity in 2016. While a party has significant flexibility to cross-examine a witness and impeach her, the Virginia rules of evidence limit a party's ability to introduce extrinsic evidence to attack a witness's credibility. The trial court improperly permitted Depp to introduce extrinsic evidence about Heard's pledge to donate $7 million to the ACLU and the Children's Hospital to attack her character and integrity. The pledge, which was announced 2 years prior to the publication of the op-ed, was not relevant to Depp's defamation claims and was unduly prejudicial. And this is, to this day, a cornerstone of the rhetoric that is used to defend him. Is like she didn't donate the money that she said she was gonna donate. And like the disparity between the use of the word pledged and the word donated, despite the fact that the ACLU has corroborated the plan that she had. Like, it was known, she was communicating with them, this was always the plan. And Johnny Depp's whole MO here was to sue her into oblivion so that she could not donate the money that she had now spent on all these lawyers, and then to say, why didn't she donate that money? Why didn't she donate the money to the fucking Children's Hospital or whatever? Depp not only used this evidence during cross-examination of Heard, but he introduced collateral evidence, including witness testimony from representatives of the ACLU and Children's Hospital about the pledge, for only one purpose: to prejudice the jury against Heard and paint her as a liar who only wanted public praise. The testimony created a mini-trial on what Heard donated, what her intent was, and whether she intends to fulfill the remaining pledge. Again, none of this related to the op-ed or whether Depp abused Heard. This is unrelated information that is being used to attack her, and honestly, being used as kind of the foundation of the trial, and to this day, again, the rhetoric that they used. The trial court committed reversible error when it admitted extrinsic evidence of Heard's alleged domestic abuse more than a decade earlier. This is another ridiculous thing they consistently bring up. It's like, see, she's so abusive, it's obvious. She was arrested for domestic violence one time 10 years ago, and the charges are not on her record because they were dropped and expunged. Oh no, I guess she must be evil. During cross-examination, Depp asked Heard about domestic abuse allegations he alleged and she engaged in a prior relationship. Heard denied the allegation. That should have been the end of it. However, the court permitted Depp to call Leonard, a former police officer, to testify that in 2009 she saw Heard acting aggressively towards her then partner, grabbing her partner and pulling her partner's necklace from her neck. Permitting extrinsic evidence of the incident that occurred 9 years prior to the publication of the op-ed violated Rule 2. I don't know how to read that, and allowed Depp to paint Heard as a bad person. The court's decision to admit Leonard's testimony regarding an incident that occurred 9 years before the publication of the op-ed served no legitimate purpose. And also, this wasn't the officer that arrested her. Everyone likes to act like it was like, oh, she was arrested by a lesbian cop. How could it have been homophobic? Because, like, that's what Amber and her partner at the time, who has also denied this allegation, by the way, that's something they love to ignore, that the person who was allegedly abused said that didn't happen. That just doesn't matter. That just doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Okay, yeah, that doesn't matter. The trial court's erroneous evidentiary rulings also left the jury without crucial evidence regarding Depp's reputation, therefore prevented the jury from accurately assessing any harm proximately caused by the op-ed. First, the trial court erroneously excluded as hearsay articles relevant to Depp's reputation prior to the publication of the op-ed. The articles, however, were not hearsay, as Heard sought to admit them not for the truth of the matters asserted in the articles, but to show the state of Depp's public reputation prior to the publication of the op-ed. And the headlines of the articles that she was not allowed to mention in court included, but were not limited to. We're going to read this whole list, okay? We're going to read this whole list. Johnny Depp, friends and family seriously concerned about him. Here's why. Johnny Depp, a star in crisis in the insane story of his missing millions. Johnny Depp reportedly drank heavily and was constantly late on the new Pirates movie set. Johnny Depp's financial woes might sink the next Pirates of the Caribbean. Where did it all go wrong for Johnny Depp? After a string of flops and a ton of bad press, Johnny Depp's star power looks wobbly as Jack Sparrow on a plank. Johnny Depp allegedly showed up drunk to a movie premiere, reports say. The trouble with Johnny Depp, multi-million-dollar lawsuits, a haze of booze and hash, a marriage gone very wrong, and a lifestyle he can't afford. Inside the trials of Johnny Depp. Vodka for breakfast, 72-hour drug binges, and spending sprees that beggar belief. Alison spending sprees that beggar belief. This must be British. Alison Boshoff reveals why Hollywood's reeling over what's being called Johnny Depp's career suicide note, and how can J.K. Rowling be genuinely happy casting wife-beater Johnny Depp in the new Fantastic Beasts film. So he was allowed to admit a statement that falsely said that the UK trial had found him innocent, but she was not allowed to bring up any of the headlines of these articles, which unquestionably were doing plenty of damage to his reputation that she had nothing to do with. That was all him, baby. Second, the trial court excluded relevant evidence related to the UK proceeding, including the Sun article and UK judgment. At minimum, the jury should have been permitted, whether it was appropriate, to apportion any claimed reputational damages between the op-ed and the Sun article. Indeed, the trial court agreed this evidence was relevant, but it nevertheless precluded Heard from introducing the Sun article, UK judgment, and published media reports regarding the UK proceeding. Similarly, by precluding Heard from admitting the UK judgment, the jury was left with a false impression about Depp's reputation. Because of the UK proceeding and the significant corresponding media attention, by November 2nd, 2020, the world already saw him as a domestic abuser. That was not Amber's fault. That was Johnny's fault. Nonetheless, the trial court kept that critical information from the jury. I'm going to read this whole paragraph because I think the last part's really funny. Given Depp's claim that the op-ed caused him significant reputational harm, it was critical that the jury hear relevant information regarding his baseline reputation. Then there's a whole bunch of stuff in parentheses. Because of this trial court's decisions, Heard was prevented from establishing that Depp could not have been harmed by publication of the op-ed because he already had a terrible reputation. Thus, while the jury was allowed to hear testimony of Depp's harm as far back as 2016, the jury was not able to fully assess the reputational harm unrelated to Heard's op-ed or the impact of a judgment that found Depp to have committed acts of domestic abuse, including sexual violence. As discussed more fully below, the impact of this error was compounded by the separate error in permitting Depp to claim damages based on conduct unrelated to the op-ed, including the 2016 restraining order. All of this resulted in an indefensible $10 million compensatory damage verdict and $5 million punitive damage verdict, a verdict that demands reversal. I think I might actually be able to get through all of this in one sitting, which is going to be pretty crazy. But this next section is actually really interesting because one of the things that he took issue with was the title specifically of the online version of the op-ed, which said, "I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change." Publication by defendant is an essential element of a claim for defamation, and retweeting a link on Twitter, which is what she did, is not grounds for, it does not constitute republication. And that is a legal precedent that has already been set, so that just should have been dismissed. Firstly, the trial court's refusal to exclude the headline from evidence led to the introduction of irrelevant and prejudicial evidence and arguments about whether Depp had committed sexual violence against Heard, a phrase that did not appear in the challenge portions of the op-ed authored by Heard. So she didn't reference this in the parts that she actually explicitly wrote. They failed to prove that she wrote this headline that did reference it, and then made that a part of the trial and tried to bring a bunch of evidence in opposition to it. Second, because the jury awarded Depp $10.35 million for all three challenge statements together, there is no way to know how much of the award is attributable to the headline that Heard did not publish. This next section talks about how the jury was not really fully instructed on the communicative intent prong of actual malice that Depp was required to prove. The trial court gave 2 jury instructions defining actual malice. One only addressed the falsity prong, which, as was discussed earlier, is really not the only thing. It's very much explicitly not the only thing you need to prove. And the second instruction correctly clarified that actual malice is not established by ill will or hatred. The trial court refused her proposed additional instruction on communicative intent prong, which is, again, her having intended to communicate what Johnny Depp is claiming this article implied, which, okay, again, we've talked about how ridiculous that is. When considering whether a jury instruction was properly refused, the evidence is viewed in light of the most favorable to the proponent of the instruction. As explained above, Depp presented no evidence that Heard either intended to communicate through the op-ed that he had engaged in domestic abuse, or knew of the defamatory meaning that was reckless in regard to it. To the contrary, the evidence showed that Heard made significant efforts to eliminate any such innuendo. The trier's improper refusal of proposed jury instruction CC requires reversal of judgment and demands for a new trial, and remand for a new trial. This next part is really interesting too. The jury verdicts are inherently and irreconcilably inconsistent. To reach the verdict against Heard on Depp's claims, the jury necessarily found that Heard had not been abused by Depp and that she knowingly lied in stating that he had abused her. Yet, at the same time, to reach the verdict in favor of Heard on one of her own defamation claims against Depp, the jury necessarily found that Heard did not lie about being a victim of domestic abuse at the hands of Depp, specifically stating that during the May 21st, 2016 incident predating the restraining order. As Depp argued prior to trial, this case involves 2 essentially mirror image defamation claims asserted against the only 2 people who truly know whether the statements at issue are true or false. If Mr. Depp did not abuse Miss Heard, she indisputably knows her claim that he did is false. If Mr. Depp did abuse Miss Heard during their brief marriage, he knows that Mr. Waldman's claims calling Miss Heard a liar are false. Thus, the trial court erred in declining to set aside the jury's verdict against Heard on the ground that it is inherently and irreconcilably inconsistent with the verdict against Depp. The judgment against Heard should be reversed and the case remanded for a new trial on Depp's claims for this reason. And also, damages that the jury assigned, absolutely excessive. I think this was remedied later. Like, she didn't end up paying all of this, but Depp's damages are limited to a narrow period between the publication of the op-ed and the issuance of the UK judgment. So this is December 18th, 2018 to November 2nd, 2020. He represented he would not seek damages for after November 2nd, 2020. Depp failed to prove any pecuniary damages resulting from the op-ed at this time, but he did not seek emotional distress damages, leaving reputational harm as his only possible source of damages. His reputation that was, again, as we have just discussed, already in the goddamn toilet. The jury's verdict of $10 million in compensatory damages is grossly disproportionate to any reputational harm the op-ed could have caused in that ridiculously small window. Even before the op-ed was published, the media reported that Depp would not be in the upcoming Pirates of the Caribbean film, and his agent testified that Disney... Sorry, phone died. I had to reorient. His agent testified that Disney was non-committal about giving Depp the role. And Depp testified that he would not have agreed to play the role in Pirates 6 even for $300 million and a million alpacas. He also did not prove that he lost the opportunity to appear in Pirates 6 because of the op-ed. Disney's corporate representatives testified that no decision-maker within the company had ever said that they would not cast Depp because of this op-ed, nor did Depp present any evidence that he lost other opportunities because of the op-ed. For example, he still has an endorsement deal with Dior, which began in 2015, and then he was in fucking Rihanna's fashion show or whatever. Like, he's doing a lot better reputationally than Amber Heard is. Given that the jury could not have awarded Depp damages for any pecuniary losses based on the evidence at trial, and Depp never sought emotional distress damages, Yeah, reputational harm. I feel like we maybe already read this part. I'm really just trying to finish this before I have to go to work. This next section we're looking at, the trial court improperly admitted evidence that encouraged the jury to award damages for conduct unrelated to Heard's op-ed, specifically evidence of the reputational harm stemming from Heard's 2016 restraining order. Depp's trial theme was a plea for the jury, through its verdict, to rectify the damage Depp suffered as a result of the restraining order. This is a quote from his people. On May 27, 2016, Miss Heard walked into a courthouse in Los Angeles, California, to get a no-notice ex parte restraining order against Mr. Depp, and in doing so, ruined his life by falsely telling the world that she was a survivor of domestic abuse at the hands of Mr. Depp. Today, on May 27, 2022, exactly 6 years later, we asked you to give Mr. Depp his life back by telling the world that Mr. Depp is not the abuser Miss Heard said he is, and hold Miss Heard accountable for her lies. Boo fucking who. These sentiments permeated the entire trial. According to Depp, when Heard obtained the restraining order, he lost nothing less than everything. And this, again, he was not founding this trial on anything that had anything to do with this restraining order and the trial surrounding it. It was statements that very explicitly did not reference it. It did not. In fact, Depp's testimony began with an explanation of why he brought this case. About 6 years ago, Heard made some quite heinous and disturbing, brought these certain criminal acts against me that were not based in any species of truth. I gotta work on that impression. Depp also testified that after the public became aware of the restraining order, the bad news about him was multiplying throughout media and throughout social media as well. Again, something that he was not basing this defamation lawsuit on and had really no legal grounds to be even discussing within it. Even Depp's expert, Doug Bania, that's a fun name, who Depp retained to analyze the impact of the allegations on Depp's reputation, could not say that Depp's reputation or public image were affected by the op-ed as opposed to the events in 2016. References for all of that in the document, etc. Because Depp improperly was allowed to suggest the jury could award damages based on the statements Heard made prior to the publication of the op-ed, like he was allowed to imply this in the trial, it was arguably the foundation of the trial, and the jury was not informed of the outcome of the UK proceeding. The jury's damage award is wholly out of proportion on the reputational damage Depp actually could have sustained as a result of the op-ed. It is clear from the size of the compensatory damages award that the jury intended to award damages not just for the op-ed, but for all negative publicity that Depp had received since Heard first accused him of abuse in 2016 and continuing after the UK judgment. This is an impermissible basis for damages in this case. At minimum, the jury's excessive damages verdict should be reversed and the case should be remanded for a new trial on damages. For the foregoing reasons, this is the conclusion. We're finally at the end. I think I might actually finish this before I go to work. For the foregoing reasons, Heard requests that this court reverse the judgment against her and either A, enter a new judgment or dismiss Depp's claims without prejudice, or B, remand for a new trial. Okay. Conclusions. Wrap-ups. I guess I just want to talk additionally about the other primary things that I see the Johnny Depp fans like. Firstly, we need to talk about the Amber Turd thing. She did not shit in his bed. There's a multitude of reasons this is ridiculous. It was her bed. He wasn't even going to be there in the house. She was also leaving the house. She had a dog with documented incontinence issues who had provably shit in the bed before. Supposedly, he was going to test the feces to see if it was human, but he never released the results of that test that he supposedly did for some reason, meaning either he didn't do it or he did not like the result that he got because she did not shit in his bed. But hey, it rhymes! Ha ha ha! It rhymes, right? It rhymes! And also, the audio recording of her saying, "Tell the world, Johnny, tell the world I, Johnny Depp, man, I'm a victim of abuse." They add a word in there. They add a. It's not Johnny Depp, man, which is what she said, making fun of his way of talking where he goes, man, man, I just, there was no a. She wasn't making it a gendered violence thing, like it wasn't. They just misquote her. And another thing they constantly do is exaggerate her claims in order to disprove them. So they'll be like, oh, she claimed to have a broken nose, but her nose isn't broken. She didn't claim to have a broken nose. She claimed she felt like her nose was broken. So they were any claims that she does make, they will exaggerate in order to deny them. And that's their whole MO. That's the whole deal they do. I'm gonna call that good for today. Honestly, I could see myself potentially doing a follow-up video where I talk about more stuff, go into more detail about the ridiculous shit these people say about her, but this is all I can emotionally withstand at the moment. I hope I've made my point, at least to some degree. Yeah, that was another video. Goodbye from Pearl and I.